Priya and Dr. Arvind Sharma seemed like the perfect couple, respected, wealthy, and admired by everyone around them. But behind the polished smiles and prestigious clinic, a horrifying secret was waiting to be uncovered, one that would shatter their world and end in a shocking murder. Dr. Arvind Sharma was known as a successful physician in one of India's busiest cities. His clinic stood as a symbol of care and respect, and people admired him for his dedication to medicine. With his charming personality and social standing, he was often praised as an example of achievement. His wife, Priya, was seen as the perfect partner, elegant, loyal, and admired in the same social circles. To the outside world, their marriage looked flawless, built on trust and mutual success. Neighbors called them a power couple, always dressed well, always smiling, and always appearing untouchable. But behind the polished image, subtle cracks began to show. Priya noticed that Arvind spent more and more nights away from home, often claiming emergencies at the clinic that kept him until dawn. At first, she trusted him completely, believing the demands of a doctor's life were simply exhausting him. Yet, her heart told her something was wrong. His phone calls became secretive, his tone impatient when questioned, and expensive gifts appeared in their home without explanation. Even the servants whispered that young women came to the clinic at strange hours, sometimes escorted by unfamiliar men. Priya ignored the rumors, convincing herself that gossip always followed wealth. Still, small details lingered in her mind. There were unexplained stains on his clothes, documents in languages she could not read, and cash hidden inside books. Each clue whispered of something darker, but she resisted listening, afraid of where it might lead. She had built her life around him, and admitting the truth meant destroying everything. What seemed like an ideal marriage was slowly twisting into a nightmare. Priya's intuition told her that beneath the smiling face of her husband, there lived a secret that could shatter both their worlds. Priya's unease grew stronger with every passing week. She began paying closer attention to the smallest details around her husband's clinic and his routines. The first thing she noticed was the way the staff avoided her eyes whenever she dropped by unannounced. Nurses who once greeted her warmly now kept their distance, speaking in hushed tones as if they were afraid of being overheard. Even the clinic's guards seemed unusually alert, watching her closely as though she was intruding in a place she was not supposed to be. The hours Arvind kept became more disturbing. He no longer returned home before sunrise, claiming that difficult surgeries had kept him busy. Yet when Priya checked the clinic's official records, there were no patients listed at those hours. Instead, she saw gaps in the logbooks, as though someone had deliberately erased details. It left her with a gnawing suspicion that her husband was hiding more than just long work shifts. One evening, when Arvind was away, Priya found an envelope tucked in his briefcase. Inside were foreign currency notes and several passports with different names, but similar photos of young women. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them, her stomach twisting with dread. She quickly returned everything to its place, terrified that her husband might catch her snooping. Despite the evidence, Priya struggled to confront him directly. Fear and denial fought inside her, one telling her to protect herself and the other begging her to seek the truth. The whispers she heard from neighbors about strange girls at the clinic suddenly felt more believable. What had once seemed like a place of healing was beginning to feel like the center of something sinister. Priya realized that her perfect world was unraveling, thread by thread. One late evening, Priya decided to visit the clinic without warning. The building was quiet, the waiting area empty, and only a dim light flickered from the back corridor. As she walked through, she noticed a door she had never paid attention to before. Unlike the others, this one was heavy, metallic, and locked tightly with a chain. A cold chill ran down her spine as she stepped closer. From behind it came faint noises, muffled cries, or whispers that made her heart pound. She pressed her ear to the surface, but the sound stopped suddenly, leaving her in a silence that felt heavier than the noise itself. Priya searched for a key but found none. The door seemed deliberately hidden, almost as if it wasn't meant to exist at all. She forced herself to leave, though her legs shook as she walked back to the car. That night, she couldn't sleep. The strange door replayed in her mind over and over, the image of chains and the sound of voices haunting her thoughts. The next day, she returned under the excuse of bringing lunch for her husband. While he was busy with a patient, Priya wandered again through the halls, carefully studying every corner. She noticed surveillance cameras pointing away from that locked door, as though someone had wanted to keep that space invisible. The realization made her blood run cold. For the first time, Priya admitted to herself that something terrible was happening inside the clinic. Whatever secrets her husband was hiding were buried behind that locked entrance. The man she had trusted, the man the community respected, was not the man she thought she knew. Priya's suspicion grew into fear, and fear began to transform into a dangerous determination to uncover the truth. Priya's curiosity and fear soon pushed her beyond hesitation. One night, she waited until Arvind left the clinic, claiming he had an emergency at a nearby hospital. With trembling hands, she returned to the locked basement door. This time, she brought tools to force it open. The lock gave way with a sharp snap, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. As she stepped down, the air grew heavy and damp, carrying a faint, unsettling odor that made her stomach churn. The basement was a hidden world beneath the clinic, small, windowless rooms with reinforced doors, some of them locked from the inside. In one corner, Priya discovered personal belongings: purses, shoes, and torn clothing. Medical records and appointment logs detailed young women who were never seen outside the clinic, marked with notes that suggested coercion rather than treatment. Cash and passports were strewn across the table, each one linked to names and countries she had never heard of. Her heart raced as she realized the horrifying truth. The clinic, the very place she had trusted and supported, was being used to traffic women across borders. The voices she had heard before were not figments of imagination. They were cries for help, muted by fear and confinement. Priya followed faint sounds down another corridor and glimpsed shadows of young women huddled together, their eyes wide with terror. At that moment, the full weight of her husband's crimes hit her. Dr. Arvind Sharma, the man celebrated in the media and by their community, had built an empire of suffering behind closed doors. Priya felt a mix of rage, betrayal, and helplessness. She realized that exposing him would be dangerous, yet staying silent felt impossible. Every fiber of her being screamed that something had to be done, and soon. Fear settled into Priya's mind like a shadow she could not shake. She knew that exposing Arvind meant risking her own life. He had powerful friends, politicians, police officers, and influential businessmen who trusted him implicitly. Even within the clinic, staff members acted more like guards than employees, their loyalty to him unshakable. Priya understood that if she tried to confront the world alone, she would be silenced before the truth could ever reach anyone. Despite the danger, guilt gnawed at her relentlessly. Every time she thought of the terrified women in the basement, trapped and voiceless, a heavy weight pressed on her chest. Their fear became her own, and the comfortable life she had known turned hollow. She began watching Arvind's movements more closely, taking mental notes of the hours he left the house and the people he interacted with. Each observation confirmed her worst suspicions, but fear kept her paralyzed. Priya's nights were restless. She imagined the worst-case scenarios, the women being hurt, herself trapped, or worse, silenced permanently. At the same time, she wrestled with a growing anger that burned hotter than fear. The man she had loved, married, and trusted was capable of unspeakable cruelty, and she had unknowingly aided him by keeping silent. One evening, a subtle change occurred. A young woman she saw on the street, looking lost and desperate, made eye contact with Priya and silently pleaded for help. That fleeting encounter shattered the last remnants of hesitation. Priya realized that she could no longer be a bystander. The fear remained, but it was now joined by a dangerous determination. She knew that exposing her husband was inevitable, even if it meant risking everything she had ever known. The breaking point came sooner than Priya expected. One rainy evening, a young woman arrived at their doorstep, soaked and shivering, with eyes full of terror. She had escaped from the clinic's hidden basement and had nowhere else to turn. Her story was horrifying. Countless women were being held against their will, threatened with violence, and forced into a network of trafficking that spanned cities and even countries. Priya listened in silence, her heart pounding as the full scope of her husband's crimes became undeniable. The encounter ignited a storm of anger and guilt inside her. She had known something was wrong, yet she had hesitated, trapped by fear and disbelief. Now, faced with the tangible evidence of suffering, hesitation was no longer an option. Priya realized that her husband could not be allowed to continue his operation, but confronting him directly was dangerous. She had seen the way he manipulated people, his charm hiding a cruel and ruthless mind. Any misstep could end not only her life, but also the lives of the women who had already suffered so much. Despite the danger, Priya began to plan. She watched her husband more closely than ever, noting every routine, every visit, and every detail that could give her an advantage. She gathered information quietly, documenting evidence without letting him suspect her intentions. The weight of what she was about to do pressed on her, but it was now coupled with an unyielding resolve. The man she had loved was a monster, and Priya knew that the path ahead would be perilous. There was no turning back. She had reached a point where action was the only way to stop the nightmare he had created. That night, the basement and the voices of the trapped women haunted her dreams. Priya understood that the line between survival and justice had blurred, and crossing it would change her life forever. That night, a violent storm raged outside, lightning splitting the sky and rain pounding against the clinic windows. Priya knew this was her moment. Her husband would never voluntarily stop, and the women below continued to suffer. She waited until Arvind returned from a supposed late-night visit, his figure briefly illuminated by the flickering streetlights. Calmly, she moved through the empty corridors, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. In the operating room, she found a surgical knife, its cold metal sending a shiver down her spine. She gripped it tightly, each heartbeat echoing in her ears. When Arvind entered the room, expecting to find nothing but shadows, he froze at the sight of her standing there, determination written on her face. Priya did not speak. There was no time for words. Years of betrayal, fear, and horror had built to this singular moment. With a swift, desperate motion, she struck. The sound of impact was muffled by the storm outside, and Arvind collapsed near the basement door, the very place where countless women had been imprisoned. For Priya, it was a mixture of relief, rage, and sorrow, an act born not just of vengeance, but of a grim necessity. She looked down at him, the man who had hidden a world of cruelty beneath the guise of respectability, and felt the bitter weight of justice finally balanced by her own hands. The storm continued to rage as Priya locked the clinic doors, ensuring no one could enter or leave. She knew the aftermath would be chaotic, but in that instant, the fear and horror that had haunted her for months were replaced by a grim resolve. The nightmare her husband had created was ending, though at an unimaginable cost. When the police arrived the next morning, the scene at the clinic stunned everyone. Priya was calm but exhausted, having confessed everything without hesitation. Investigators discovered the hidden basement, locked rooms, and the personal belongings of dozens of women who had been trafficked. The medical records, passports, and cash strewn across the tables painted a chilling picture of an international trafficking operation. For the authorities, it was a case unlike any they had seen before, a respected doctor leading a double life of unimaginable cruelty. News of the discovery spread quickly, shaking the city to its core. Neighbors, patients, and colleagues struggled to reconcile the image of Dr. Arvind Sharma, the trusted physician, with the crimes uncovered beneath his clinic. Priya's actions became the subject of heated debates. Some condemned her for taking the law into her own hands, while many others saw her act as a desperate attempt to stop further suffering. The rescued women were taken into care, their trauma documented and slowly addressed, but the psychological scars ran deep. For Priya, the aftermath was both relief and despair. The man she had loved and trusted was gone, but the truth had finally come to light. The clinic, once a symbol of respect and healing, had become a dark reminder of human cruelty and deception. Though arrested for murder, Priya's courage in exposing the trafficking network ensured that countless lives were saved and that justice, in a complicated and painful way, had been served. The case remained in the headlines for months, a stark warning of how appearances can deceive and how darkness can hide behind even the most familiar faces. The city would never forget the story of the doctor's wife who uncovered the unthinkable and acted, knowing the cost would be her own freedom. The nightmare had ended, but the lessons of trust, vigilance, and courage would echo long after.